This video explores Amsterdam in 1672, a year that stands at the very peak of the Dutch Golden Age, but also marks the beginning of its greatest test. Using original paintings, maps and engravings created by the artists who witnessed these events firsthand, I've employed modern AI reconstruction tools to transform these historical artworks into moving scenes. We'll shift perspectives, create new camera angles, and move through spaces in ways the original painters never could. I've also recreated the ambient sounds of the period, water lapping against stone, the creak of rigging, market voices, church bells, to help you feel what it was like to stand in Amsterdam at this pivotal moment. Through these reconstructed images and sounds, we can witness Amsterdam in 1672 as if we were there ourselves, walking its streets during the most dangerous and defining year of the Golden Age. Let's begin at the harbour, the beating heart of Amsterdam's power. In 1672, this waterfront represented the source of the Republic's extraordinary wealth. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, operated from these very docks, and its ships dominated global trade routes stretching to Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Large three-masted vessels prepared for voyages that would last months or even years. Smaller boats ferried cargo between warehouses, while dock workers moved continuously along the quays, loading pepper, textiles, porcelain, and spices. The sounds here were constant. The splash of oars, the shout of sailors, the rumble of barrels being rolled across cobblestones. This harbour generated profits that funded Amsterdam's grand architecture, its art, and its position as Europe's financial centre. But in 1672, these same waters would soon be threatened as never before. Now we move to the Amstel River, looking toward the city from the water approach. This was the view newcomers saw when arriving by boat, and it spoke immediately of Amsterdam's ambitions. The skyline was dominated by church towers, warehouses, and the tall, narrow facades of merchant houses, all reflected in the river's surface. The Amstel served as both highway and boundary, connecting Amsterdam to inland trade routes while defining its eastern edge. Barges laden with grain, timber, and beer moved steadily along the water. Fishermen worked the shallows. Along the banks you would have seen cranes lifting cargo, workers repairing boats, and residents drawing water for daily use. The scene felt purposeful and prosperous, a city entirely built around commerce and movement. Yet by summer 1672, anxiety would ripple through these same waterways as foreign armies closed in on the Republic. Here we see the Dam Square, the absolute centre of Amsterdam's civic life. By 1672, the new town hall, now the Royal Palace, had been completed less than 2 decades earlier, and it stood as a declaration of the city's confidence. This massive classical building, resting on thousands of wooden piles driven deep into the marshy ground, housed the city government and the courts. The square itself buzzed with activity. Merchants negotiated deals, notices were posted, public announcements were made, residents crossed the space on their way to the Westerkerk or to the surrounding guild halls and shops. The atmosphere was orderly but intense, reflecting Amsterdam's role as a city that governed itself through commerce and law rather than royal decree. In 1672, this square would become a gathering point for anxious crowds seeking news of the war that was engulfing the Republic. Walking along the Reconstruction, we enter one of Amsterdam's famous canal rings. By 1672, this canal belt was nearly complete, a planned expansion that had transformed Amsterdam from a medieval port into a geometrically ordered modern city. The Herengracht, or Gentleman's Canal, was home to the wealthiest merchants and regents. Their houses rose 4 or 5 stories high, built with fine brickwork, sandstone ornaments, and large windows designed to display prosperity. Each facade was narrow but deep, with warehouses and storage rooms extending toward the back. Walking here, you would have heard the quiet movement of water, the footsteps of servants running errands, and occasionally the rattle of a carriage on the cobblestones. Gardens were hidden behind the houses. The air smelled of coal smoke and canal water. This was wealth made visible, but it was also wealth constantly reinvested, never simply hoarded. The families living here financed trading voyages, lent money to governments, and speculated on commodities from around the world. Now we arrive at the Oude-Zuidsvoorburgwal, one of the oldest canals in the city centre. Unlike the newer planned canals, this waterway followed Amsterdam's medieval street pattern, winding irregularly through densely packed neighbourhoods. By 1672, this area was home to a mix of trades: brewers, bakers, coopers, and tailors, alongside boarding houses, taverns, and smaller merchant operations. The buildings leaned slightly, their wooden frames settling into the soft ground over generations. Laundry hung from upper windows. Small boats were tied along the canal edge, used for local deliveries or simply as convenient storage. The soundscape here was more intimate than the grand canals. Voices calling from windows, the clatter of workshop tools, children playing near the water's edge. This was the Amsterdam most residents actually lived in, away from the show facades of the Herengracht, a working neighbourhood that kept the city functioning. Let's move now to the Westerkerk. Completed in 1631 and by 1672, one of Amsterdam's most recognisable landmarks. Its tower, the Westertoren, rose 85 metres above the city, crowned with the imperial crown of Maximilian of Austria, a symbol the city had been granted centuries earlier. The bells of the Westerkerk regulated daily life, marking hours and calling people to prayer. Rembrandt van Rijn, who had died just 3 years earlier in 1669, was buried somewhere in this church, though the exact location of his grave was never recorded. Standing in the square before the Westerkerk, you would have seen a mix of residents: Calvinists attending services, immigrants from the southern Netherlands, German labourers, Sephardic Jews conducting business nearby. Amsterdam's toleration was not idealism, it was pragmatism. The city welcomed anyone who could contribute to trade and did not disturb public order. In 1672, this pragmatic openness would be tested as the Republic faced invasion and internal political crisis. Now we look at the Portuguese synagogue, completed in 1675 but whose community was already well established by 1672. Amsterdam's Sephardic Jews, many of whom had fled the Iberian Peninsula to escape persecution, had built one of the most important Jewish communities in Europe. They were merchants, brokers, printers, and scholars. Their presence was visible in neighbourhoods like the Jodenbuurt, where Hebrew letters appeared on shop fronts, and the rhythms of Sabbath observance shaped weekly life. The Portuguese Jews operated within Amsterdam's complex system of toleration. They could not hold public office or join guilds, but they could worship openly, own property, and participate in trade. Walking through this area in 1672, you would have heard Portuguese, Spanish, and Hebrew spoken alongside Dutch, a reminder that Amsterdam's prosperity depended on networks that stretched far beyond the Netherlands. Here we see the East India House, the VOC headquarters on the Kloveniersburg-Wal. In 1672, this building was the nerve centre of the largest and most powerful trading company the world had ever seen. Inside, the 17 directors of the VOC, the Heer and Sixtiethand, met to review reports from Java, Ceylon and Japan, to authorise voyages, to set prices for pepper and nutmeg, to decide which settlements to fortify and which competitors to drive out. The VOC was not merely a company, it functioned as a state within a state, with its own army, its own fleet, and the authority to wage war and negotiate treaties in Asia. Clerks filled the rooms, copying manifests and bills of lading. Sailors waited in the courtyard for new assignments. Investors came to collect dividends. The wealth generated here supported not just Amsterdam, but the entire Dutch Republic. Yet in 1672, even the VOC's power could not protect the Republic from the armies gathering at its borders. Now we must address the crisis itself. The year 1672 is known in Dutch history as the Rampjaar, the disaster year. In the spring, a coalition of France, England, Münster and Cologne declared war on the Dutch Republic. French armies under Louis XIV invaded from the south, sweeping through the provinces and approaching the heartland of Holland itself. English warships blockaded the coast. Panic spread through Amsterdam. There were runs on banks. Wealthy families prepared to flee. The states of Holland ordered the flooding of the polders, deliberately breaching dikes to create water barriers that would slow the French advance. Fields that had been reclaimed from the sea over generations were sacrificed to save the Republic. Walking through Amsterdam in the summer of 1672, you would have felt the tension everywhere, in rushed conversations, in the lines of refugees arriving from the southern provinces, in the grim faces of men enlisting in hastily formed militias. This view shows the Admiralty building, where naval strategy was debated and coordinated. The Dutch fleet, though skilled, now faced the combined navies of France and England. At sea, Admiral Michel de Ruyter fought a series of desperate battles to keep supply lines open and prevent an English landing. On land, the situation was even worse. The Dutch army, chronically underfunded and poorly led, could not stop the French advance. It was only the flooding of the land and the determination of individual cities to resist that prevented total collapse. In Amsterdam, the crisis triggered a political revolution. The ruling regents, blamed for the Republic's unpreparedness, were overthrown. Johan de Witt, the Grand Pensionary who had led the Republic for 20 years, was murdered by a mob in The Hague. William III of Orange, just 21 years old, was installed as stadtholder and given command of the army and navy. The Republic survived 1672, but it was transformed by the experience. Looking back at the canals now, in the late summer of 1672, the city appears outwardly the same. The houses still stand, the ships still move, but everything has changed. Amsterdam's golden age, that extraordinary century of expansion and confidence, has reached its limit. The Republic will continue to prosper, but it will never again hold the unchallenged dominance it enjoyed before 1672. The future belongs to larger, more centralised states, to France, to England, eventually to rising powers farther east. Yet Amsterdam endures. Its institutions, its capital, its networks of trade and finance continue to shape European and global history long after the political power of the Dutch Republic has faded. Standing here, reconstructing these scenes, it's remarkable to realise how close we still are to these events. The canals remain. Many of the buildings survive. The choices made in 1672 echo forward to our own time. If there's another city, another year, or another historical moment you'd like to see reconstructed, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching.